An American criminal profiler says investigators are wasting their time and money looking for missing British girl Madeleine McCann because it is extremely unlikely the child was abducted. Pat Brown, who runs her own criminal profiling agency in the United States, has criticised the extra funding given to Scotland Yard to extend the search for Madeleine for another 6 months. Madeleine McCann went missing in Portugal on the 3rd day of May 2007. Scotland Yard has already spent more than $18 million searching for her. Ms Brown explained her theory about what she believes happened to Madeleine to John Campbell.
All the evidence that I have reviewed points to the most likely scenario that there was no abduction. There's absolutely not a shred of evidence that proves an abduction at all. The child is missing, so in theory she could have been abducted, true. But the evidence, there's not any evidence to support that. And the majority of the evidence supports that an accident occurred in the home and that the body was then removed in an effort to cover up what had happened. That's what the evidence points to, and so I stand by that, and I've been standing by that for many, many years.
This is a terrible situation because if you're wrong, then insult is being added to injury, isn't it? And there's so much speculation about Madeleine, and Kate and Jerry are looking for their daughter. It is heartbreaking if you believe them when they say that they do not know what happened to her. How do we get that balancing act right between rigour and empathy?
Well, first of all, when you come down to analysing a case, empathy has nothing to do with it. I've analyzed many cases where I feel very badly for sometimes even the person who committed a serious crime for whatever reasons they were led to do so. But that doesn't change the facts. And regardless of our feelings on anything, the facts remain. And that's
a good response. And it reveals the shortcomings of my question. I guess what my question is saying is that the thesis you're advancing, and you're not alone in advancing it, has not been supported by sufficient evidence for charges to be laid, right?
Yes, but there's a reason for that. The reason for that is that, first of all, there was a kind of disturbance of the crime scene in the beginning because when the McCanns came into the flat as they gave their statement as to what they did, there were a lot of them and their friends running about. And then when the police came, the first thought was, of course, that the child had been kidnapped. And so you always have those initial moments where, some certain amounts of evidence may disappear. That happens with every crime, which always makes things more difficult in the future. After that point, as they were doing more investigations, the Portuguese police became suspicious of the statements of the McCanns and their friends because there were things that did not make sense. First of all, many of the early statements about things like the shutters were jimmied and certain things that occurred were not true. So things that would support possibly an abduction simply did not stand up. Many of the stories conflicted, didn't make sense, and were later proven to be wrong. So with all of that going on, the police then became concerned that the McCanns may be involved in what happened to their child. When they went to question the McCanns, Kate refused to answer any of the questions, and following that, they left Portugal. And the case was shelved at that point because they were no longer there, and neither were their friends. And so at that point, they did not have enough evidence to go further. But as the Supreme Court recently said, which very much upset the McCanns, because what has been touted for many, many years, especially in the media, is that the McCanns were cleared. They were not suspects. That is not true. The Portuguese Supreme Court said very clearly they have not been cleared. They at this point they have not been cleared, and they shouldn't have been cleared. And when Scotland Yard came in to do the review, one of the most bizarre and egregious things that came out of that was when they started the review, they started with the premise that it was an abduction and the McCanns were not involved in any way. Well, I have never seen somebody do a review of a case and not review the evidence and to start with a supposition, before you even begin. When I've reviewed cold cases for police departments, I walk in and sometimes even the police will say, well, here's what happened. I'll go, no. I'm not here to hear your story. I'm here to examine the evidence from the beginning. And as far as I know, everybody's a suspect at this point. And I will work to exclude people. So, so what should have happened with the Scotland Yard when they came in, they should have said, we have no conclusions at this point. We do not know what happened to Madeleine. We do not know whether she was abducted or there was an accident, or we don't know. We don't know if the McCanns were involved, but they weren't, because we have not examined the evidence yet. When they got there and started examining the evidence, if they could exclude the McCanns along the way and have proof to exclude the McCanns, then they could do so. But they excluded the McCanns before they started the investigation. And they started with a premise. It was actual remit that this is an abduction. We're going to investigate it as an abduction. And I've never seen anything like that. Now they've spent, what is it now? In U.S. dollars, it's $18 million in 6 years, achieving absolutely nothing. They had not one clue more than when they started. Probably because they're not examining the right avenues.
Yeah. None of this proves anything, does it? And I know that I keep coming back to this. I know that because where is no, absolutely, and you're making a compelling case, and I'm enjoying listening to you. But also, where in life is the prescription for how grief-stricken parents ought to behave? I
can tell you how it works, because of course everybody has slightly different behaviors. This is true. But when you have worked with a lot of people, there are definitely more typical behaviors. And there are things that are real red flags. That's why when you do, for example, statement analysis, you can always say, oh, people say things in all kinds of different ways. Not exactly true. Statement analysis will prove that most people say things in exactly the same way, and you can learn a lot from their statements. You can learn a lot from their behaviors. So when you have people behaving in a way that is abnormal and making statements that are red flags, then there is something to look at. And this is what has happened with McCann. Let me explain one I find very, very peculiar from the very beginning. Early on in the investigation, one of the statements from the friends was that Jane Tanner, one of the McCann's friends who they were dining with, came back toward the holiday flat, and she saw a man walking across the street from the flat with a little girl in his arms. And at the same time, Jerry McCann was standing on the street talking to a friend named Jez. She passed by them. Oddly enough, they never saw her. They also never saw the man carrying the child. Now, I've been there to Portugal, and I've been on that street. And let me tell you, it's a very narrow street, a very incredibly quiet street at night. There's no way she could have passed them and they did not see her or not see the abductor. That would be just pretty much unbelievable. But, okay, let's assume that really happened. The McCanns were totally for this. This is the person that took our child. This is the person that took our child. Yet, just a short time later, the Smith family saw a man walking toward the beach from the direction of that holiday flat, from the direction of McCann's flat. They saw someone carrying that child toward the beach. That entire family saw this. Yet the McCanns did not want to recognize that person as a possible abductor. Why not? Because every parent of a missing child that I've known will tell you everybody, as they'll say, check this person out, check that person out, check out the mailman, check out the milkman. They think everybody did it because they don't want to give up one possible shred of a lead that might lead to the missing child. So why would you ignore the Smith sighting of this man walking toward the beach with a child? It could be your child. Why would you ignore that and say, oh, it could only be Jane Tanner? Well, there's a good reason for that. Jane Tanner gives Jerry McCann an alibi. And that's a concern. Later on, it was proven that if she did see that man, it certainly wasn't an abductor. So therefore, that leaves us with the Smith sighting. But when Kate wrote her book, again, even in her book, because I waited for that book to come out before I wrote my book, so I could hear it from the horse's mouth. I wanted to give her a chance to express herself. And she, in that book, finally grudgingly said, well, it could be the person who abducted Madeleine, but only if it was the same person that Jane Tanner saw. In other words, the man that Jane Tanner saw must have ducked into a doorway someplace, waited around for a bit, and then headed toward the beach. So again, that's peculiar. But that's your explanation? Because, again, it just sounds like you're concerned about Jerry having an alibi. So these are things that when the police are going to examine a case, or profile examines a case, they're going to start noting these things. Now, does one of these things in itself prove anything? You're correct. No, it doesn't. But it is the entirety of the evidence, the entirety of all the behaviors, the entirety of all the statements. And, so you put all of this together, and that's where the theory develops. Now, if you look at the theory of an abduction, there's just nothing. There is absolutely nothing to support an abduction at all. Not one shred of evidence. No behaviors, no physical evidence, nothing. Yet that's what Scotland Yard was running after for 6 years and coming up with nothing, because there is no evidence of that.
Gosh, you're really persuaded of this. I mean, you sound absolutely convinced by the theory that some accident happened to Madeleine and that her body was removed and concealed. What, is there any doubt in your mind that that's the case?
Yes, well, along with there's many, many reasons for it. As I say, the entirety of the evidence, but there's a number of striking issues. One is that when all the statements were made, I believe that the statements and the evidence supports that the holiday flat was locked that evening. It was not left open for anybody to be able to come into. It was locked. And if it was locked, nobody would have any access to it. Secondly, the cadaver dogs that were brought in did hit in the McCann flat. They hit behind the sofa, which is an unusual place, but not so unusual when you think of a child climbing up and perhaps falling behind the sofa, hitting their head, having positional asphyxiation behind the sofa. We have a possibility, and it's a very strong one, that the children have been given medication to help them sleep while the parents went out and had entertained themselves. We don't have absolute proof of that, but we have some indications that this may well have happened. So when you start putting these things together, especially with the dogs hitting and the cadaver and the blood dog hit in the apartment, then it seems quite likely that the child died in the apartment. The dogs also hit later on the McCann's car, the rental vehicle, and in the boot of it, and that was one of the things that leads one to theorize that the child was moved later. And there's good reasons for this, by the way. Moved from a location that was not as secure to a more desolate location to where her body would not be found. And as Jerry said very clearly to one of the reporters, find the body and prove we did it. Well, they have not found the body, which is one reason nobody's been convicted of this crime or taken to court, because they do not have a body, and it's very difficult to prosecute without a body or a confession.
And that's criminal profiler Pat Brown speaking with John Campbell about the Madeleine McCann case. And Madeleine's parents, Jerry and Kate McCann, declined to respond to Ms. Brown's theory.